Did you know that how you walk with God can directly affect your health? Well, we're going to talk about that today, so let's get to it right now. Last week, I spoke to you about how God burned a message into my heart after I had been diagnosed with cancer, and He told me to run. From Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1, and I showed the correlation of prayer and the promises of God, the impossible, and our health. And I want to continue talking about our health because I believe it's really important. You know, when you're young, you really don't think about these things so much, but then as you grow older, health becomes very, very important. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, I did a real heart search on my life in every way, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, in every way. And God really did a work in my life and changed a lot of lifestyle things with me. And we'll be talking about that in one of the future videos that we make. But God did this deep work in me about my health. And one of the things that happened is I began to take an evaluation of my life and others' lives, and I looked at people. And one of the things the conclusions that I came to was this. The people that I knew who were the godliest, most Christ-like people who made a great impact on my heart and my whole thinking, my whole vision for who I am as a Christian, were people who were older. I think of Dr. Dennis Kinlaw, who died in his early 90s, and I would go and I would visit with Dr. Kinlaw, and I would spend time with him. And sometimes he lived in Kentucky and I lived here in San Antonio, and I would fly to Kentucky, go out to his house, and I'd just sit down and say, "Talk to me," because the man was so much like Jesus, so much like Jesus. He had been president of Asbury University when the Great Revival in 1970 took place, and that's where I first met him, and over the years we developed a friendship. But the older he became, the more Christ-like he became. I saw the love, the joy, the peace, the kindness, the goodness in him. And that aging process was a beautiful thing. Another man, Dr. Frank Laubach, who was one of the great men of educating the illiterate. He had been a missionary, and he's well known for the method of teaching literacy to people. And God used him in a mighty way. But I met him just a few months before he passed. And he was the same way, so much like Jesus. And it did such a deep work in my heart. But as I had cancer, I began to think about those guys. And I thought, the older you get, the more you ought to become like Jesus. The outer man is decaying, but the inner man is being renewed. And then I began to think about what if we could remain healthy as long as possible and live a healthy lifestyle. And as we grow older, we would be able to minister in such a greater way. And by the way, that's a vision that I have right now of being able to do things. I realize I'm in the fourth quarter. I realize I'm in the final season. But I know this, that if I can maintain my health as long as possible, I should have a greater platform for ministry. Because what is the platform? The platform is the character of Christ. People, and I see this all the time, people come up to me and say, "Sammy, thank you for your faithfulness. 55 years walking with Jesus, preaching the gospel. Thank you for your faithfulness." And it's such a blessing. But what I realize is the older you get, if you're becoming like Jesus, the greater your platform. And so as your platform is greater, one of the things that I want to do is I want to be able to, with full force, be able to share the good news of Jesus Christ with others. With full force, be able to make disciples of the nations. With full force, be able to do all that God has called me to do. And so that's my desire. That's my dream. That's what I long for. And so health plays a very important role. Now, there are 4 areas that I think are important when we talk about health. There's a spiritual area, there's a mental area, there is an emotional area, and there is a physical area. And all four of these areas need to be strong. You need to be healthy in all four areas. And I'm going to be bringing in someone that I interviewed not long after I had cancer and when I first began to run and after I ran that Greek marathon. And you're going to see me a lot skinnier in these videos, and my hair is a little bit different in these videos because right after that time, I interviewed a dear friend by the name of Dr. Walt Larrimore. Dr. Larrimore has worked with Focus on the Family. He's a medical doctor. He's done research. And we talked about these issues. And today, I want you to hear some of the things we talked about when we talked about the relationship of your walk with God and your health. And he shows, as a medical doctor, the correlation between your walk with God and your health. So let's go to Dr. Walt Larrimore right now.
Talking with Dr. Walt Larrimore about the physical, the mental, emotional, and the relationships that really affect our health. And we're going to go to even a deeper level now, and that's the spiritual level. And so I want us to talk about how the spiritual level, our relationship there, affects health. And then that sounds funny, and I don't know. Let me just ask you this basic question. How does science view that? I mean, is there any kind of scientific evidence that there's a spiritual underpinning for our health?
It's stunning. There's now over 4,000 studies in the medical literature that look at the relationship between positive spirituality and physical, emotional, and relational health. What those studies show is that there's an intricate and intimate relationship. People who are healthy spiritually have better physical, emotional, and relational health. By positive spirituality, which is a term that I coined in the medical literature, I define that two ways. Positive spirituality is spirituality that benefits the person and others around them. Positive spirituality isn't spirituality that blows up people or harms people.
Right.
But it's healthful spirituality that results in the measurable fruit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, the fruit of the Spirit. So I can go into secular environments and talk about positive spirituality and the studies that show that people that have that do better physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. Now it's clear to Christians we're talking about biblical spirituality because the research shows that that is the one that is most highly healthy.
So to develop that kind of a relationship, here's a person I'm thinking about, a guy who maybe came to know Christ when he was a young person. He has Christ in his heart, but his life's still a mess. Emotionally, he's a basket case. Relationally, it's very dysfunctional. How does he develop a spiritual basis to help him?
I like to think of it this way, Sammy. Think of that spiritual health as a wheel, if you would, with four spokes. And this illustration comes from a fellow named Dawson Trotman. In fact, his two grandsons are working on the crew with us today, but Dawson's who taught me this spiritual wheel. The hub of that is a personal relationship with God through Christ. You cannot have spiritual health until you first have established that relationship with God through Christ, inviting Him into your life, trusting Him. Once He's in, once His Spirit has adopted you, inhabits you, then the potential for spiritual health is there. The vertical spokes of that wheel are our relationship with God. And I think of two critical spokes. One of them is spending that time with God and His Word on a daily basis. God speaks to me through His Word, and I've got to ingest that, take that in on a daily basis. And then prayer, that's talking with Him. So talking with Him, prayer, conversation, and then listening with Him through His Word. That builds my relationship with Him. I call that the vertical spoke, if you would. But then there's the horizontal spoke, and that's got to be balanced in two ways. One is my relationship with other believers, my relationship with Christians. That's my fellowship with them, my church time, my Sunday school time, my small group time.
Even the mentoring relationship.
Absolutely. But then that's got to be balanced with my relationship with non-believers. And the Bible makes it clear to me that I need to invest in both of those arenas, my spiritual health is dependent upon investing in people outside of the kingdom. Now, the Bible calls that evangelism, but it's relationships at work, and it's relationships with neighbors. And those four spokes together, in fact, in the assessment tool, we measure those to see if we come up short. And I find in my life, I have to reevaluate those spokes on a frequent basis to be sure I'm not getting out of balance.
You know, balance is a key word here. The balanced life is a healthy life. And you know, when I look at Jesus, he was the most balanced human being who ever walked the face of this earth. I mean, you just look at his life. I mean, there was so much balance, and sometimes people think it's contradiction. It's not contradictions, it's balance. And so I want to encourage you to develop that kind of a balanced life.
Wow, you didn't hear it from someone who's just a preacher. You heard that from a medical doctor, from a scientific viewpoint. There are studies that show your relationship with God, your spiritual walk with God, does have a direct relationship with your health. And if you're going to be healthy, then you, part of that has got to be, and I think for me, the very core, the very center, the foundation of your health begins with your relationship with God. And it's got to be balanced. It's got to be a balanced relationship. One of the things that happens so many times is we go off to extremes. And as I was saying there at the end of the conversation, balance is so important. So what we want to do is we want to become like Jesus, because he's the most balanced person who ever lived. And the more you become like Christ, the more balanced you become. And by the way, we all have a long way to go in that until the day we die. So to maintain a healthy life is to maintain a healthy walk with God, where you're growing in your relationship with him, and you're coming to know him and becoming more like him. So you do that. Ask God to help you to develop that balance in your heart, your walk with him. And the next week, we're going to talk about some other things that are also important. The physical part is important. The mental and emotional parts are important. And we're going to talk about that next week. So God bless you, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.